So you want a Royal Enfield 650, which tells me one of two things. Either you've reached a higher level of motorcycle enlightenment, or you're looking for every way to avoid being financially abused by this hobby. And let's get real for a second. Modern motorcycles have gotten a little out of hand. 14-inch curved displays on a CF Moto 450 with winglets and brake ducts, launch control on a 40 horsepower KTM. Come on, boys, sometimes you want to skip the farkles and just cruise to the coffee shop in style. That's when Royal Enfield failed upwards. What started strictly as a value play has evolved into an entire philosophy. These bikes don't chase high horsepower or cutting-edge tech. They just want to provide a simple, authentic riding experience at a price point that doesn't leave you questioning your life decisions while staring at your bedroom ceiling at 4 a.m. And clearly, it's working. And I'll be totally honest, I was sold on this. I used to be a bit of a Royal Enfield hater many years ago here on the channel, and I've kind of come around, especially as cultural nihilism has taken over in motorcycling. These are raw, authentic, and pretty cool. And the market bears out what I'm saying, because Royal Enfield sold 1.2 million motorcycles last year. So maybe you will be customer 1,200,001. Royal Enfield has a lot of different options for their 650s, so let's just jump right in. Now, usually how the Royal Enfield pipeline goes is that you start imagining yourself with a Barcelona Blue or Cali Green INT 650, but before you get too far ahead with those delusions of grandeurs, we've got to talk a little bit more about these motorcycles so you know what you're getting into. If you're coming from a place of performance, you're either going to be let down, confused, or a little bit of both. All the Royal Enfield 650s are based on the exact same platform. They use the 648cc parallel twins that are air and oil cooled, which has become a bit of a novelty in the market. They make 48 horsepower and 39 foot-pounds of torque. And by comparison to a 650 class naked bike you're probably used to thinking about, it's not very powerful. But this engine is characterful and much more charming than you'd expect. With so much of the torque being available low down in the rev range, you still got a nice grunty power delivery. You're not going to be blasting this thing out to 12,000 RPM, that's for sure, but you do get those right kind of natural feelings from the motorcycle. It's a bike that could be totally suitable for a beginner rider or enjoyable for someone who wants to just bop around the neighborhood, and that's kind of a hard thing to pull off. Beyond the engine, you get a 6-speed gearbox, which is more than any air-cooled Evo Sportster could ever say, or even a DRZ. The suspension and brakes are fine, they're adequate, they'll perform okay on the road. These machines are clearly built to meet a price point, and with your expectations in check, I don't think you'll be too disappointed. If you look a little closely, some of the kind of features and touch points feel a little chintzy, but the bones of the Royal Enfield 650s are really solid. What you may be missing in performance, you will make up for in experience. And I know that sounds like the most cop-out thing to say in motorcycling, but it's true, because these bikes provide a classic vibe and authenticity that's kind of rare nowadays. And it's completely non-existent in the sub $7,000 price bracket, because it used to be if you wanted classic character and charm, well, Triumph was more than happy to have you head over to the dealership and cut a $20,000 check for a Bonneville. But none of that really explains why people are lining up to buy these bikes. Clearly, something else is going on here. It's really simple why these bikes work. Every Royal Enfield 650 has a presence you would not expect based on the price or performance. They look like a real motorcycle in an authentic sense. And we actually proved this out. We had a Royal Enfield as a fun kind of tester bike back in 2021. We parked it in the middle of downtown Austin, and we asked people, how much do you think this bike cost? The average price was over $20,000. Meanwhile, you just paid about $6,500 for it. Pretty good. These things are stripped down to everything you need and nothing you don't. They're not laden with fake go-fast parts, avant-garde proportions, or needless technology. It's an engine, a frame, and 2 wheels. Simple, mechanical, and honest. Now, this simplistic philosophy carries over to the riding experience as well, because you're not digging through menus or toggling ride modes. You've got enough torque to get moving around town and strong mechanical feedback through the machine. These modern classic bikes are really easy to ride and get along with. And to be honest, the further I keep going in this video, the more I'm like, you know what? It sounds like a lot of fun. Maybe I'll pick up another Royal Enfield as a giveaway bike. And these things don't require an incessant amount of babying to ride on the street. You're not constantly waiting for the right moment to open it up. You can ride a Royal Enfield as fast or as slow as you want on the street and nothing's gonna happen. Not to mention the value. Now, I might be getting ahead of myself slightly, but with the Royal Enfield 650, you get about 80% of the Bonneville T100 experience for about half the price. That is a pretty serious accomplishment, and you guys know me, I'm a value-driven person. That's built-in value right there, baby. So after all that, you still want a Royal Enfield 650, we gotta figure out which one you're gonna get, because there's a lot, with new ones popping up like weeds every other year. Because Royal Enfield figured, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So they took their long-proven 650 platform and they dressed it up in a bunch of different outfits. Now, like I said, each one is based on the same mechanical components, but the experience can feel pretty different depending on which model you choose. The INT 650 is the sort of default option. It's got the classic British roadster stance with a neutral riding position, wide handlebar, and a long flat seat. It's not overly stylized or leaning too hard in any one direction. It's just a simple, classic motorcycle that appeals to a wide range of riders. It's probably the one I would pick. The Continental GT leans a little further into the cafe racer aesthetic. It uses clip-on handlebars and a slightly rear-set pegs and a little bit more aggressive riding position. It's a little less comfortable, but a little more sporty. It also uses a rear cowl instead of a full seat, so if you plan on riding two up, the GT probably isn't the move. You give up some comfort compared to the INT, but it does look pretty sweet. If you're into the whole cafe racer vibe and aesthetic, this could be the right one for you. But temper your expectations on how much sport you're really gonna get out of this bike. The Super Meteor 650 moves into cruiser territory. Lower seat, forward controls, more relaxed ergonomics and geometry. This one is easily the most approachable of the bunch if you're a shorter or newer rider, or you just want something super chill to ride. But it is heavier and definitely less playful than the others. And in case you're curious, I tested this motorcycle out in India, and so it can actually handle some pretty crazy roads and pretty crazy traffic too. The Shotgun 650 sits somewhere in between, kind of a sportier cruiser, kind of a bobber, mid-controls, lower handlebar, solo seat. It's a good option if you want something relaxed but not quite as laid back as the Super Meteor. But wait, there's more! The classic 650 is, well, classic. This is the full heritage play. Spoked wheel, solo seat, pea-shooter exhaust, everything that screams sort of 1950s British motorcycling. If you want maximum nostalgia without mechanical anxiety, this is probably your lane. And finally, the Bear 650. This is their scrambler-y version of the platform. Slightly more capable suspension, dual sport tires, a bit more rugged intent. Can it actually scramble? I mean, anything can scramble if you try hard enough, but without a high-mounted exhaust, something tells me you're gonna be hitting hard parts pretty quick if you get too ambitious. So, which one should you get? Honestly, it mostly just comes down to aesthetics. These bikes aren't that different between one another. Roadster, cafe racer, cruiser, scrambler, they're all delivering very similar experiences, just with slightly different ergos and style. Why does your riding footage look like you were riding a Grom in a school zone when you know for a fact you were fighting for your life out there on your Super Sport? The disconnect between what it feels like and what it looks like can be totally heartbreaking. The DJI Osmo 360 is a game changer. This camera intentionally makes your footage feel more alive and cinematic thanks to features like motion blur. So not only can you shoot in 360 degrees, but this camera will provide that natural blurred effect to the background as you rip through town. That way your footage looks authentic and atmospheric instead of flat and boring. Shooting in 360 creates an easy workflow and infinite options for editing in post. You can mount this camera on your helmet, tail section, or handlebar and know you're gonna have plenty of cool shots to choose from. With the Osmo 360, what you actually experience on your ride is authentically translated on video. If you want to shoot footage that does justice to your riding, check out the DJI Osmo 360 at the link in the description down below. Thanks DJI, now let's get back to the show. But Royal Enfield isn't the only company leaning on style and nostalgia to sell motorcycles. So depending on whether you value style, experience, or just outright value, there's a few other options you're going to want to look at. If you want the same classic old school experience but with a bit more of a premium feel, you've got some options. Now obviously the biggest contender is the Triumph Bonneville T100 and Speed Twin 900. They're kind of like the finished project versions of what Royal Enfield is doing. They have better suspension, nicer brakes, more power, and just a little bit more polished fit and finished. Everything feels just a little bit more refined. The problem is that they cost more, like a lot more. You can get an INT 650 for a little over $6,000 brand new, $5,000 or less on the used market. I've seen some really nice ones going for like $4,200. The MSRP for a Bonneville T100 is $11,495, so you're probably going to spend close to $13,000 out the door brand new. That is a massive delta. You're spending nearly twice as much for a motorcycle that's maybe 30% better. Depending on what you value, it can be a massive deal breaker, but if it's really important to you to get that Triumph badge, you're gonna have to pay for it. There's also the Moto Guzzi V7. This motorcycle might be as classic as a modern classic can get. We recently had a V7 in the shop as a giveaway bike, and it certainly is one of the most interesting bikes I've ridden in a long time, and one that definitely left a long-lasting impression. It is an air-cooled transverse V-twin, a shaft drive, and all the little quirks you'd expect from an old-school Italian bike. But again, you're gonna have to pay for that privilege. A V7 is gonna cost you closer to $10,000 brand new, but I've seen many used models going for closer to $5,000 or $6,000. I'm even of the belief that what Royal Enfield is doing with their 650s is the modern equivalent of the Evo 883 Sportster in some ways. I've been saying this for a while, and I know it's a strange comparison, but I really do think it's true. It's super simple, classic, proven mechanical architecture, lots of big bike presence at an affordable price, some serious heft and feeling like it's made out of real metal. The similarities are almost striking. You got lots of aftermarket parts, and people love Sportsters for many reasons, but the customizability is a huge factor for a lot of owners. In a similar way, S&S makes a lot of cool performance parts for the Royal Enfield 650s as well, from full exhaust systems to even big bore kits. But if you want the cachet that comes from the bar and shield, an Indian-made bike just won't do. But if you don't care about that stuff, I think the Royal Enfield might be a better buy. Sportsters are also a dime a dozen, and you can find them from like $4,000 to $6,000 depending on age and mileage. I've got pretty serious seat time with both Sportsters, modified Sportsters, stock 1200s. Honestly, I do prefer riding the Royal Enfield 650s over all of those, as interesting as they are. Well, let's say you're interested in Royal Enfields because of their value. Maybe you're shopping for your first bike, and there's definitely some other entry-level options with varying degrees of classic appeal. The Honda Rebel 500 or SCL 500 are more modern, potentially more reliable, and very much the safe, affordable bet. But they also feel much more like appliances than motorcycles. The Rebel's blacked-out bobber look is pretty played out at this point. And the SCL 500 is even less of a scrambler than the bare 650. If you just want ease of ownership and reliability at the expense of character and charm, maybe the Hondas are a good alternative. But if it were up to me, I'd take the slow yet cool and interesting bike instead of the slow and characterless bike. Pretty much the same story for the Kawasaki Eliminator 450 or the CF Moto 450 CLC. They're just naked bikes dressed up to kind of look like cruisers. They don't have the curb appeal, the presence, the character, or the charm. They might work well enough in a basic sense, but they don't offer any special feeling in the way that a classic air-cooled twin does. And if you're new to motorcycling, you might not really understand how big of a difference that is, but riding a tiny liquid-cooled engine that was designed for a naked bike versus a classic, beautiful, mostly made of metal air-cooled bike, it couldn't be more different. Now, as far as the budget beginner bikes go, I'd say Royal Enfield wins out every time, which is kind of crazy for me to say because, again, for years, I joked about Royal Enfield. I didn't think they were a serious company, but then I just kind of saw the writing on the wall with the way the industry went, and now they really came out on top. When it comes to more premium alternatives, I think it will depend on the pricing in the used market and what bikes are local to you, because based solely on brand new MSRPs, most can't compete with Royal Enfield's value-driven pricing. These bikes are for someone who doesn't care about winning spec sheet arguments or pushing the limits of physics every time they go out for a ride. If you're the type of person cross-shopping horsepower numbers, quarter-mile times, or top speed, this is quite clearly not your motorcycle. It's for someone who values the experience more than anything. Getting out there, getting your knees in the breeze, and having a good time cruising around. You simply want to ride for the sake of riding. You want a bike that looks cool and classic without trying too hard. These can also be really great for new riders, especially those who may be older or returning after some time away from the saddle. If you're a 40-year-old beginner, you don't need to be riding a Z400. That ain't you. You're a grown-ass man. Go get a Royal Enfield. You'll feel better about yourself. Get something a little more classic, more reserved, or a little understated. Maybe align better with the mature palate. You're not going to whiskey throttle the thing into orbit, but it also doesn't feel cheap or disposable the way some other beginner rides do. Or maybe you're an experienced rider who is kind of over the go fast lifestyle. Or maybe you're just trying to add another bike to the stable as a foil to your sport bike or your hyper naked, something you can ride without worrying about crashing or getting pulled over all the time, and it looks cool. If you want cutting edge performance or premium tech and Farkles, these bikes ain't gonna cut it. But if you want something honest and simple, something that feels good to ride and looks good parked, then the Royal Enfield 650s do make a lot of sense. And if that sounds like you, what's it like to actually own one? Because we have to be honest, for a long time, Royal Enfield had something of an unsavory reputation. I mean, like I said, back in the day, I used to make fun of these bikes. They were not that reliable, particularly before the 650 platforms came out. They leaked a lot of oil, broke down. It was kind of like a classic nostalgic bike experience, but paying new bike prices. But these days, these bikes are pretty well sorted. The engine's super simple and under stress. That usually translates to longevity. You're not dealing with high-strung, fast-moving internals or complicated electronics. Maintenance is pretty straightforward too. Valve adjustments on these, although frequent, are pretty simple. And this is a huge factor for most motorcyclists in India, Royal Enfield's home market. Because people need bikes that will just churn miles in tough conditions and not skip a beat. That's much of the reason Royal Enfield has stayed so loyal to the air-cooled twins. These bikes are cheap to purchase, cheap to insure, and the cost of consumables is low as well. So you might not think that an Indian bike would work here in America, but think about the rigorous testing those bikes have to go through in their home markets. I mean, a Royal Enfield 650 living in India, then coming over here in America, it's like an easy life for that bike to live. Not a big deal. You're not going to be burning through tires or brake pads like you would on a faster motorcycle. And listen, they're not perfect. The fit and finish is not going to hold a candle to a Triumph when you look closely. But remember, at the end of the day, they're budget bikes. And for a lot of people, that trade-off is worth making. Look, Royal Enfield is just out here doing their own thing with these motorcycles. And clearly, based on sales alone, it's working. If you want to eschew the power progression ladder, reject the desire to be the fastest 22-year-old on TikTok, and just enjoy motorcycling in a pure, simple form, I think you might want a Royal Enfield 650. If you want to be unplugged, you don't like scrolling, you just want to go out and enjoy your motorcycle, you don't want your bike connected to the internet, maybe we all need a Royal Enfield 650. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I appreciate it. I will catch you in the next one.